folks hear me? Is that a yes? All right. I don't even need a mic for those that know me well. Whoops. Let's back up. Oh, good. There we go. Excellent. It is awesome to be here. This is a big, big day for us at AWS, and certainly with KX. We've been working together for a better part of 2 years now. And so I'm going to walk you a little bit through what this is, give you a little history of how it came to be, and then Vinny over there, he's heads up our what we call specialist SA team. He's going to come up and walk through a little demo and give you just kind of sense of how easy it is to use. But look forward to talking with everyone also over the next couple of days. I'll be here through Saturday. So let's just get started here. I'm going to start with what drove this collaboration. We like to work backwards from the customers. You may have heard of the phrase working backwards. And so in talking with, in our space, first it starts with the data, right? You've got all this data that is being used for analytics, and it's kind of used across the board for everything. This is not new to you all. And as we were working with customers, we start to hear KX for those. And KX is coming up, and our customers are using it a lot. They're asking how they can, how can they move this to the cloud? And we have many of you are probably out there already thinking about how could I move this to the cloud, and what can we do there? And so then what happened is, it was really you. We actually had customers coming to us saying, could you help us run this on AWS? We want to take advantage of some of the cloud capabilities, whether it's auto-scaling, being able to make it highly available, being able to spin up new workloads, new KDB clusters for new customers. And so they're saying, how can you help us with that? And so that's really where it started. And so we start with, talks a little bit about, and again, if you've worked with managing infrastructure on-prem, this will be familiar. What are the challenges that everyone's facing? Whether it's provisioning hardware, somebody comes and says, hey, I've got a new portfolio team that needs, they want to run some new analytics, or I need to expand something out to do some back testing. And the answer is like, well, I'm out of hardware, so I need to go buy some new hardware. Or we need to, I came out of FINRA. And at FINRA, what we would have to do is there'd be something would happen, and we'd have to go offload a bunch of stuff from devices we were using just so we could run some tests, and then we'd bring it all back. It was just this constant dance. I think Saman was mentioning that. And so then once you get the infrastructure, you've got to tune it. And figure out how to make sure it's highly available. You're getting into capacity planning. Is it big enough? And you never really know how big and how much volume you're going to need. Security and compliance, this is probably everyone's best friend. Who here works with their security team? I bet everybody does, right? And then as we've kind of gotten in and working with the KX community, you look at how they're taking the infrastructure they've got today, and they're delicately kind of putting out processes on them. Because they have to make sure you've got some of these processes that have to run and can't be interrupted. You've got some that bounce up and down depending on the types of the queries. And the question is, how can we make that better? And these are the kind of things we were hearing from customers. And so with that, we like to say that AWS and KX listened. We've had the customers that came to us, we've spent time talking to them and understanding, how do you use KDB? How do you structure it? How do you build out your infrastructure? And so what we're intending to do is, in this partnership, kind of create a solution that allows you to take and leverage the benefits of the flexibility of KDB. As Saman, as you all know, setting up whether it's the different types of kind of real-time event streams, whether it's the historical analytics, and being able to move that to AWS and get the benefits of a managed service. And with that, let's see here. I'm trying to make sure I'm on schedule. I was told we have to be right at 30 minutes. With that, we've created Amazon Finspace with managed KDB. And I love our little tagline here. This is our goal, right? We want to be able to make it easy for you to set up, operate, and scale your infrastructure with just a few clicks. So that what you can do is spend time worrying about writing the Q code, the PySQL code, writing your actual analytics, deploying it, scaling it out. If you've got a new team that needs to run a test, you say, sure, click, click, there you go, you've got it, and you can go run it. And that's our goal is that you actually are able to use more of it, use it more quickly. So here's a few benefits we've kind of listed up here. The first is being able to eliminate the operational overhead. What do we mean by that? Well, with the new service that we're launching, you'll have, it's integrated with CloudFormation, it's integrated with Terraform, it's integrated with APIs. So now you can just tie it right into your CI/CD environments to be able to provision new infrastructure. For some of you at larger companies, that's a real big plus because there's all kinds of rules around governance and compliance. They want to be able to track what you're running. The next is being able to keep up with the market volatility and high availability. But I like to say while managing spend. So At AWS, when we work with customers, they all want lots of flexibility, but they also realize with that comes a cost. If I just let someone turn on the spigot and turn it as high as they want, that could create a challenge for me. So I need to make sure that I can turn on infrastructure and I can use it, and I can make sure that the right team is paying for it, the right department. I can govern it if I need to. And so what we're trying to do is provide that flexibility and ensure you've got those controls around it. The next is launch and deliver analytics, kind of on demand. This is a common thing we've heard. We've got teams, they've got budget, they want to do some back testing, simple one. But I don't have the infrastructure. So I have to tell them to wait. Either can go buy more infrastructure, or I can wait till there's a quiet time and I can offload something and run it on there now. And now it's click, click. There you go. You've got this infrastructure and you can go out and run these, perform this back test in this particular example. And then the last is accelerate migration to AWS. Now, AWS is complicated, right? I mean, those of you that know AWS, there's a lot of flexibility. There's all these building blocks and how you put it together, and that brings a lot of benefits, but it also can take time. You've got to figure out how to put the pieces together. And so the idea here is that, again, with a few clicks, you've got the infrastructure ready to go. It's secure, it's integrated, it scales, and you can now bring that configuration that you know and love and that you've been using and bring it right to AWS. And then over time, you'll also be able to then modernize that with, say, microservices, right? But you don't have to start off with them if you don't want to. And so as we're going to be adding in the capability for that, then you could use, say, the storage manager over time, those types of pieces. So the goal here is to really be able to accelerate the migration. So let's go to one more slide. I got a couple more slides, and then we'll turn it over to Vinny. So this one talks a little bit about what does it look like when you're fully managing infrastructure. And so you see this long list of tasks. And this is what you have to manage. Everything from the very bottom layer of managing infrastructure all the way up to tuning and managing the data and managing the application. But with a fully managed environment, the idea is that AWS takes on this stack here, and you take on what's important to you, which is what's the structure of your database need to be? What's your schema? What data's in it? What are the analytics? That's what you're good at. Right? And we manage the infrastructure, the failover, the data management. We've got some new capabilities around the data management that Vinny will talk to, and then some of the other things below it. All right, so then we got this picture kind of puts it all together, gives you a sense of what's in it. And so we have the AWS console, so now you'll actually be able to go into the console and see what clusters you've got running, what databases that you have. But you'll also be able to use the APIs. Many of you probably rely on the APIs today. You'll be able to use the Terraform and CloudFormation. And then the bottom one is the KDB endpoints. The idea being that for those of you that are providing KDB infrastructure for, say, applications, there's no change. That would be the goal here. You now have the ability to provision infrastructure, spin it up, put the data on it, and they just keep running as they do today. They may not even realize that behind the scenes it's now running on the cloud. And some of the customers that we're talking with that are looking to do migrations, they actually will have what we call a hybrid infrastructure for a while. They have a gateway set up on-prem, and that gateway takes incoming queries, routes it around. Some of it might go to the cloud, some of it may stay on-prem. And the end users know no difference, or the applications. And then you can see some of the other pieces here together. How are we doing on time, Vinny? Still good? So with all of that, you can create, this kind of gives you a little example of what does a simple kind of KDB application architecture look like. And you can see here that on the premise here, there's a gateway that routes out to the cloud gateway. You've got an RDB, you've got HDB, managed storage. Now, you'll see here the ticker plant is outside the green box. Come September, that ticker plant will be inside the green box. But we like to be honest, right? So and that will allow things like your RDB replays and things like that from the ticker plant logs. And so this just kind of gives you an example of a kind of a simple architecture. And then I'll close with, these are kind of what are some common use cases that we're seeing. Not with KDB, right? I mean, you know what you use KDB for if you're doing TCA, doing things like that. But this kind of talks about it from a managed KDB perspective. If you're trying to migrate applications to AWS and rapidly modernize them, it makes it easier to do that. If you need to deploy scale out, as we call it, rapidly deploy new applications. So now you may have a team come and they say, hey, I'd like to use KDB and you don't have any infrastructure today. A few clicks and you've got it running in the cloud. You're ready to go. And the last one's a little bit more of a kind of similar to that, but provisioning infrastructure to test, to run back tests. And this is the one that we seem to hear a good bit where they need to scale up a cluster. They've got petabytes of data. They want to run that test, and today they just simply can't. So these kind of give you an example of some of the use cases. So with that, now you can get to see it in action. That's probably what you really want to see, right? You don't want to hear me talk. So Vinny?
All right.
He's not going to use slides, though.
No, we can actually go to the switch very quickly. So what I'm going to do from a demo perspective on the product is I'm going to fly over, just from the AWS console perspective, a lot of the things that we're managing for you. That'll touch upon the features that we're taking over from a managing of this infrastructure. So from the beginning, in the console, there's your managed KDB Insights environment. This is, in this case, I call it my managed KX beta environment. I can give it a name. Everything we do in these environments, by the way, is always encrypted. So encryption on all the data that's at rest, encryption on all the data that's in motion, being passed between the different nodes and the clusters and so forth. You can see this one's running in US East 1. Then there's the resources that we're managing here. We're managing the databases, because actually one of the things we did for the managed service here is we're actually separating your compute from your storage. You have databases that you're managing within the environment. You're making changes to those databases over time. We're managing that information. We're then also managing the compute atop that data. So the RDBs and HDBs that you're putting on top of it, we are doing that atop the managed storage that we're taking care of. And I'll show you how that manifests itself on what you're effectively getting now is backup and versioning of the databases as you're going along. So here on my database, and I'll show it to you here, I've got like the list of my database resources, and one of them here is one I do a lot of demos from, is my basic tick database. Now, I mean, it's pretty simple. We got the resource database R, and this is what we're going to use for permissioning. So of course, entitlements are part of this. So you're going to have the entitlements that you know of who what my role is. My role is going to be able to do certain things. I will be able to access databases. I will be able to access clusters. I will be able to access clusters that have a certain database, and those things always have to match. There are going to be secure connections to those clusters on top of it. But it's all start with the resources and these resource identifiers. Nice thing down here we have at the bottom is something that we're calling change sets. This is how my database has been changing over time. I just want to start from really, this is a list of, looks like about a dozen or so changes I made to this database. It's all in time. Most recent is at the top. The first one is at the bottom. Give you an idea of what this change set looks like. Might look a little familiar to those who know the file system. It's a bundle of files that are my database, and this is my change set. So I create a database. It's an empty container. I add files to it. That's my database. I change or add more files to it, modifying what was there before, adding new files over time, and this is how the thing progresses. So in here, it's actually a displayed partition database. The SIM file's in here. This is the initial state. I wanted to show you this one first because now you can see what happens over time. Is that this one was, now this is what happened for an end of day save down. One more date got added. My SIM file, of course, is getting updated. That's what's in the one partition. These are kind of hidden because this was done from an RDB cluster that was running in the managed environment as well. So my RDB was collecting data. At the end of the day, it saved down the data locally, sent it in as a change set into the system, and then eventually I will intend my HDB to update and use a newer version of that database. And I'll show you how that looks like from an HDB's perspective. So that's the database, the change sets. Next resource we have that we're getting to here is clusters. And the clusters here is we have a set of clusters running. I've got HDBs, RDBs, a gateway or two running. I want to show you one specific HDB I have in my list that's running some information. And there's a lot of stuff on here, so just bear with me as I go through the different parts and features that we do for a managed HDB cluster. So the first thing is of course, you got the name. There's a port that you can access it through. There's actually a whole encrypted signed URL string that you use to connect to these clusters. Again, it's secure. You only get that string if the one asking for it is allowed to use that cluster. But as Tim mentioned earlier, CloudWatch, CloudTrail, that monitoring, Well, the monitoring is built into the system, and you see here it's kind of idle, but you see some of the metrics that we're collecting. You can run rules against these things, have alerts running against this. This is all what you can now do off the back of this, but all these metrics are now being collected on the cluster. Not even just the cluster, but also the nodes within that cluster as well. This is a 3-node cluster. Under details here is you see some of the things that go on in configuring a cluster. One thing here is this one, in HDB, I deployed some code to it, and I had an initialization script for it. That initialization script also has some command line arguments to it as well. You can deploy your code to these machines. You can have it run the code that you want. You can give it the command line arguments that you want it to do. This is all open to you to do. These are updatable fields on the clusters as well. Here's a little bit of a networking thing. VPC is virtual private cloud, to those not familiar with our terminology. But this is really how this thing is sitting in its own virtual cloud and how it's going to relate to the rest of my infrastructure that I have in the cloud. And then finally here on my data management services is my data management storages. I have the ability to, I'm skipping one in the middle. Auto scaling. This one just came out, and this is my beta. This came out just over the last week or so. I do not have this cluster set up for auto scaling. But this is where I will be able to see that my cluster can auto-scale, where it's sitting in its auto-scaling. I can adjust the rules. The most basic one is more or less CPU usage. If I have high CPU usage on my nodes, I can ramp up the number of nodes on my HDB, and then if it then goes back down again, after a while, have it ramp back down again. So this one is one that was just added, but auto-scaling is now built in, HDB specifically, because they're kind of a stateless type of a machine. And the last one here is the data management and storage perspective here, capability. We're not just taking your data and we're managing. We're actually also providing a high-speed cache if you so want it for the HDBs as well. And there's one level of caching. You get to choose what you want to have cached for your HDB. So as a simple use case, this is one where I'm caching everything else. Hence, you see the path of just slash, just cache the whole database, everything underneath root. But you can also choose to, for a use case if I want to just cache the last 5 days. So I just tell it the last 5 date partitions I want it to cache. And the rest of it I want it to just come from the base storage that's underneath it. So that's slower storage. Maybe that's data you don't access too much. But this HDB can be spun up to have all the data available. The most recent data is quickly available to you for any of your queries. And of course, you can update. The other thing I should finish that story. You also, as you're doing those use cases of end-of-day save downs and then moving the date one more level later, all it is another update to the cluster to tell it to now essentially cache differently. Give it a new set of 5 dates. You'll drop one, add one. We'll take care of essentially moving the data around, having the cache now change its state of what it was working on. So that was the clusters. Next is the users. This one, I have a user Bob in here just as an example, but Bob here is somebody who I can then permit to do certain things with my resources. That's the last little bit of stuff that's going on from our management of the service. And lastly is the networking options here. We have integrations with Transit Gateway to integrate back into the enterprise. The specific use cases and where this is going to be necessary is in the case where Tim showed you with the ticker plants. My RDB is going to be connecting to a ticker plant on the other side. I need to have essentially network routes set up so I can actually talk to an EC2 that's running in my cloud versus in the managed environment of managed KDB Insights. So this is where transit gateways are configured and attached to this VPC so everything works nice and orderly. And your security guys and networking guys are going to like that particular part of things. So that's just a quick flyover of all the stuff that's available within it. And if there's one more, we're doing okay on time. Yes, we are. Let me just give you just a quick little run through just on a code example on here. All right, so now let's move from the infrastructure to how you actually use this and how it looks to people using it. I'm a bit of a noob on Q. I will admit it. I got to get to know Q during this process and during this project, but this is a quick little walkthrough of what an end-of-day save down looks like, and then also some of the functionality we're adding to what you can do in Q on the remote clusters as well. So I was talking about those connection strings. These are what are called signed URLs in our standpoint. They're actually quite long because there's a whole encryption that's going on to essentially make sure this is a secure connection and you've been entitled with the right keys to access it. And there's 2 connection strings I'm going to use in this example, talking to my RDB and talking to my HDB. There's, of course, the database that I'm working with, and there's a scratch space that I know of that exists in here that I'm just going to make use of in the code. I'm going to open up a connection to an RDB. I'm going to just do a quick little select the most recent and count what's on that RDB, how many rows I have. So it's the most recent data that was arriving. There's about 3.8 million rows that I see that are here. Next is save this down. you're just going to essentially take what's in memory and save that down, taking care of the SIM file as well as that. So everything's now matching with the SIM file that was on this. The cluster was started with the same SIM file and the managed storage underneath, so that's being taken care of. That's that new date partition I created. And then I'm going to create a little table that's going to say, essentially, this is my payload of that change set. So that's the other important thing here. This is change set, basket of files. What's the basket of files? Well, they're here on the local file system. I want you manage KDB, please put this as a new change set into my database. And that command is really just a simple .aws create change set. That's the payload, the table, that's my change set. Now put it up onto the service. That's an asynchronous operation, so the change set ID is created. It's now being actioned on. It takes a little while where it moves from in progress to completed. And that's it. What happened now back on these databases and what you see happening is this is where you saw on my cluster all my different versions that were arriving. And the reason why you saw where is mine? Excuse me. Wrong. I want to go to my cluster, to my database, not to my cluster. This is why you saw in the basic TickDB that there were these change sets arriving, and where this S3 is essentially, it says Finspace landing. This is essentially under the covers what was moving along on the different stuff going around. And if I want to now update the database and the cluster, that's why I was going to clusters and got myself a little out of whack here. I can always go here into the console if I wanted to go and change the details in the database that I'm operating on. I can just come over here to the database, say edit. Here's my list of versions. What it takes me to change a version of my database, this is running on the most recent one, but all I have to do is essentially pick another version, change it what I want to cache, and then just say, and that starts the process of updating my HDB and updating my data. So the whole thing of opening, and this is also through APIs, I just wanted to show you how to do it from the console as well. So you just saw in here essentially the way that we're managing all this data for you, we're managing all your different compute clusters for you, you're managing the users that are allowed to use those resources as well. You have the ability to change and monitor this stuff in here, write rules, auto scale as you want to, and also with the APIs that you have, there's APIs that we do through our standard external Bodo AWS command line APIs to do all this type of administration, but also we're providing some Q APIs for you as well inside these clusters to do this save down operation, create change set operation as well. That's really it, what I had from a demo perspective for you. I hope this is giving you a bit of a flavor of what we're going to be releasing in just a matter of weeks on what we're going to, and we're very excited to be working with our partners at KX to get this thing out. And it's been a long journey, and it's now the fun really starts too on top of it all. So, thank you.